Alright, this comes up a lot, so I wanted to talk about it. Essentially, it's probably what I consider to be one of the biggest lies in American politics, and I'm going to guess it's probably a pretty persistent lie in pretty much any democracy. Essentially, there's this notion that somehow economic growth and taxation are tied together. The argument goes like this. When taxes are high, rich people have less money to invest in new business, so fewer new businesses are created and job creation and economic growth is slowed. This is, of course, total bullshit. The thing is, taxation doesn't drive investment. Demand does. Imagine if you have $1 billion to invest in something. You look around and you say, people want to buy widgets, but there aren't very many widget factories. So, you think to yourself, I could use this $1 billion to build a widget factory and sell lots of widgets. And you know you're going to make money because people want to buy widgets. Well, that's demand-driven investment. Here's the thing. If the tax rate on the income you'll generate off that investment is 25%, you'll probably be happy with that because, hey, you're keeping 75, which is actually pretty good. But if the tax rate is instead, 35%, which actually isn't that high in comparison to a lot of other things, but anyway, 35%, and you say, okay, well, people want to buy widgets, you're not going to not build that factory because the tax rate is higher. The only thing that's going to keep you from building that factory is knowing that no one is going to buy your widgets. So, in theory, it doesn't really matter what the tax rate is, so long as there's demand. Because any profit is better than no profit. And if you're refusing to build the factory, what you're really doing there is choosing no profit over some profit. And that's just ludicrous, insane, and dumb. No one really buys that argument. So really, the only tax rate where your choice would be no profit or no profit was if the tax rate was 100%. And honestly, that's never going to happen. So don't worry about it. My point being here is that if you really want to cause economic growth, you can't do it by lowering taxation on investment, because the investment's going to happen so long as there's demand. If you want to cause economic growth, then you have to have economic policies that increase demand. You do this by focusing on where demand comes from. For example, widgets. You know, a widget being, I probably should have explained earlier, being a term for any little manufactured good. If you want people to be able to buy more widgets, or more people to buy widgets, well then it seems pretty simple that a greater number of people have to be able to afford widgets, and they need to want widgets. Assuming the widgets are something that people want, then hey, demand part is being taken care of. The only thing that would keep them from actually purchasing those items is if they could not afford them. If manufacturing technology and that sort of thing can only bring the price of a widget down so far, if you want to sell more widgets, then the people buying them have to have more money. It's just sort of that simple. Now, you can get into a whole other debate about, you know, where does the buying population get that more money from? You could make the argument that lowering taxes on large numbers of people instead of minorities of people, i.e. rich people, would have that effect. You could make the argument that social programs, such as Social Security, that makes it so old people can afford widgets, could have that effect. So there's different ways to go about it. My point here is not to tell you how to put more money in the hands of more people. My point here is to point out the lie that is that investment is related to taxation. It is not. Investment is related to demand. If there is demand for a product or service, someone will invest in that product or service. And even if there's a shortage of currency, most of the West has central banks that will issue currency. If an individual believes strongly enough that there is demand for a product or service, they can go to a bank and they can borrow the money. And if the bank doesn't have the money because people aren't putting it in their savings account, the bank can go to the reserve. In the case of the U.S., that's the Federal Reserve. And they can borrow the money. The money is there to be invested. It does not depend on the tax rate, because that money can always be borrowed from the lender of last resort. Investment comes with demand. There's no other way about it. And if you use your head and think about basic economics, you'll see that it's true. It's self-evident. You don't have to listen to people on TV saying, oh, the investor class isn't going to, invest. No, that's the one thing that they are going to do. Under every circumstances, they're not going to stop investing because their taxes are too high. They're only going to stop investing when there's not demand. As you can see in, say, 2008, had that housing bubble blow up and people started getting laid off. Demand dropped because people didn't have money. So that's when investment slowed down. And it didn't matter how much money the Federal Reserve and the Department of Treasury threw at the problem. The economy wasn't getting better because the people had the money. The banks sat on the money and did nothing with it because there wasn't demand for them to invest in something. Think about that.